Roger, thank you very much for being willing to be interviewed. Welcome, and can you tell us a little bit about what you do?
Yes, not very much at the moment in terms of the fact that I'm retired, though I do have a number of part-time jobs that I'm glad to say keep me going, keep my brain stimulated, and so on. And amongst those is the job I'm still doing, at least for another year, as a Chancellor of the Diocese of Hereford.
Just for those who don't know what a Chancellor is, can you explain what is a Chancellor?
Chancellor is the ecclesiastical judge of the diocese. Each diocese in the Church of England has what is known as a consistory court, and the judge of the consistory court, or ecclesiastical court, is called a chancellor, as distinct from the chancellor of a cathedral, who is called the cathedral chancellor or the chancellor. The diocesan chancellor is the judge of the consistory court.
So what difference? Sorry, yeah. What sort of different things do you do as a chancellor?
Well, the job now as Chancellor is basically essentially determined with one aspect, and that is that nothing can go into a church, nothing can go out of a church, nothing can be changed in a church without the permission of the ecclesiastical judge. And he or she, and there are quite a few lady chancellors, act on the advice of the Diocesan Advisory Committee, which is a group of experts drawn from the locality who have particular expertise in culture, history, fabrics, art, architecture, history of buildings, and so on. And their function and role is to advise the Chancellor. The Chancellor is not bound by their recommendations or their advice, but he must take it into account. And above all, the Chancellor has to bear in mind the worship and mission of the Church. So it's what changes to a church are exempt from normal planning controls. In terms of a listed building, if they're a listed church, they're exempt from the planning controls applicable to listed buildings. Instead, we have what is known as the faculty jurisdiction. That is the task of the Chancellor, acting on advice of experts as to whether or not a petition for change should be granted, and if so, on what terms. This can range from all sorts of things, such as a complete reordering whereby the interior of the church is changed, pews taken out, the altar is moved, the lectern is moved to a different place from a more permanent role. Anything to do with the fabric and structure inside the church, repair and removal or alteration of stained glass windows. And also I get concerned sometimes with applications for exhumations, where people, for one reason or another, wish to exhume the body of the dear departed and rebury the body, or the ashes if they're in a casket, to a new grave for a variety of reasons. Sometimes it's because they've decided to move and they wish to take mum, dad, or grandparents with them, or because occasionally, very occasionally, through an unfortunate mistake, the remains have been buried in the wrong grave, intended for somebody else. Allied with that, we get requests to reserve grave spaces so that people can be assured of a burial plot in a particular churchyard. That tends to depend upon how many are in the parish, what the number of graves per year are likely to be, and so on. The job of Chancellor is incredibly ancient. It goes back prior to the Norman invasion. And indeed, even prior to the Norman invasion, most civil justice was exercised by chancellors, not just in relation to churches as it now has become, but also in relation to marriages, to wills, and so on and so forth.
Right, so a very, very ancient role, but also an important role within the life of the diocese and the church nationally. But quite a legal role, and so but has implications for spirituality. So where is God, I guess, is the question. Where is God in that role? Where have you found God in and through that, what you do?
One of the things I like about the job, you're quite right, it's predominantly a legal role and predominantly a judicial role. But being a small jurisdiction, if you like, or as it now is, because all the other functions have been taken over by the secular courts, it has what I like to call a huge spiritual or pastoral aspect to it. That, of course, is all of that is reflected in the primary role of the Chancellor, which is to have regard to the worship and mission of the Church. And every single petition I get, even the most mundane things, such as to put a new carpet in the vestry or whatever, you have to remember that behind all this are the people that propose it. And this can give rise to quite strong passions and strong feelings, and people can get very, very heated. And one of the things I've myself, not every chancellor is like this, but I always like to look for practical ways of resolving disputes. There's more than one way of skinning a rabbit. That, to me, is why the whole thing is God-centered, because it may sound prosaic, but you are looking to see what is the aim behind the change that they propose. How best does it suit, or how best does it fulfill the mission of the Church and Christianity in that context? Bearing in mind that particularly with listed buildings, there is a presumption against change. And that is only because that's the price that the Church of England's paid for the lack of oversight by secular planning control. And I'm glad of that, quite frankly. It does tend to mean that things get dealt with much quicker. But you are dealing with people from all kinds of backgrounds. Simple illustration. One of the first jobs I did when I was first made a Deputy Chancellor, a long time ago, I was Deputy Chancellor for the Diocese of Southwark. That is a huge London diocese with a great different background of all kinds of people, but also it's extremely poor in terms of, if you want to be sort of hard-nosed about it, in terms of the average income of most people that live within the Diocese of Southwark. Yet it probably actually won't surprise most people to know that I found that, and it is still well known, that Southwark is one of the richest in terms of its charitable giving. People, even 20 years ago, gave generously. They still do in Southwark. And the churches reflect the people. They are, I can remember, they are light, they are colourful, they are a reflection of the different cultures that live in the diocese. And this is one of the things I think you have to remember. We are all human beings, we're all made in God's image, and each one of us brings a different dimension to it. But I also have to remember that, and one of the things I find personally extremely humbling is I've obviously over the years I've been into many, many, many different churches, some grade 1 listed that have been there for since, in some cases, Saxon times. Some are stone built and small and quite plain. Others are rich, ornate, with medieval screens and so on and so forth. Others are very modern. Skulls, for example, is a good example of that. but they're all different and they all reflect the people that worship in them. And I can never go into a church, whether as chancellor or otherwise, but probably because of my experience as a chancellor, without reflecting on the, particularly in the case of the older churches, that this is a church into which thousands of ordinary people over the years have stepped, whether for christenings, marriages, deaths and burials. The whole gamut of life and worship is in those churches. And what I see my role as, and I think chancellors do, is to conserve that as opposed to preserving it, which is not the same thing at all. It doesn't mean to say the Church of England and chancellors are against all change, far from it. There are many cases where I have received letters of objection from historic England saying, oh, well, you shouldn't do this, you shouldn't do that, and all the rest of it. But it seems to me that what the proposals do, which are say, recommended by the Diocesan Advisory Committee, and are a fair reflection of what the parish wants and will meet the needs for some time to come of future generations, should be permitted. What you have to try and remember to avoid, at least in my feeling, is that the things that interest people today, and which are the fashion today, not necessarily the fashion of tomorrow. And equally, the fashion of the past is likewise not necessarily the fashion of today. Victorians, for example, introduced huge, great wooden pews to many, many churches, whereas prior to that, for centuries, the church, certainly in the Middle Ages, and for many years subsequently, the church nave would be strewn with rushes or straw, and there would people that wouldn't be seats at all. People would stand, or there'd be benches, or later on there'd be chairs introduced. And a number of churches today want to take out the pews. Some people regard that as horrific and awful and dreadful thing, but in its context, doesn't seem to me any reason why it shouldn't in an appropriate case. But I've had some fun and some quite some alarming things. The other thing that the Chancellor often has to do, because you get appointed to a number of different posts when the diocesan Chancellor is also made the Vicar General of the diocese, which is an administrative role where you're really the representative of the bishop dealing with administrative and legal matters. And I had a case in one of my dioceses. I used to be also the Chancellor of the Diocese of St Albans, but I had an instance where there was a huge dispute in the parish, and it had really, feelings were running very, very high on both sides. And the bishop asked me if I would, and the archdeacon asked me if I would help and intervene and go down and try and sort things out. So I said to the archdeacon that I said, well, there's no petition, so I can't go as Chancellor, but I can go as Vicar General. And to my amusement, the archdeacon said, what's that? So I said to him, well, if you don't know, they certainly won't. So I went and was announced as Vicar General, and everybody looked frightfully sort of, what on earth does that mean? But anyway, we gathered everybody together from the parish who was interested in coming. There were about 70 or 80 people there. The bishop was there, the archdeacon was there, the vicar was obviously there. And they all lined up in the village hall, which a neighbouring parish, not the one concerned, had very kindly offered, I think free of charge. And they even laid on lunch for us all, which I thought was a really neighbourly Christian thing to do. And we sat in this long room with one lot lined up on one side and the other lot lined up on the other side. Felt a bit like sort of some 19th century Houses of Parliament, with the government and the opposition. And I thought, how am I going to start this off? So I said to them all, I said, look, I'm going to let you all speak your mind about these various disputes. And we will go around the room, giving everybody a chance to speak your mind. But it stays in this room. So I'm obviously not going to say exactly anything about where it was, who it was, anything about the dispute, if you will forgive me. But so we all started off, and they all spoke their minds, some quite vehemently, and the other lots were absolutely brilliant. They stayed quiet. And this went on till lunchtime. And we broke at lunchtime, and I thought over lunch, are we going to finish this? We've only got the day for this. So after lunch, I said, generally, does everybody wish to continue with this process, or do you want to move on to think of positive ways of resolving all these disputes? No, they wanted to continue and finish the process, which I thought fair enough. So we did. We went on, we finished the process. Everybody had their say. And then, to my utter amazement, I think because it demonstrated the need of people to express their feelings, at the end of it, the Archdeacon reminded everybody of the Lord's Prayer. And he went through the Lord's Prayer line by line. Forgive us our trespasses as we forgive those who trespass against us. And that struck a note with everybody, I think. I thought it was pure inspiration. It was a real instance of the Spirit talking. And they agreed a very constructive way forward after that. And I have to say, this was many years ago. And the last I heard, every so often I check up and ask, how is that parish doing? And so far, I'm told, apart from a few rocky moments, they have been doing very, very well, which I was very pleased about. So you get this great difference in the job. And the thing that delights me is seeing and reflecting that it's the people in the parish that make the place.
Thank you. That's really lovely. Lovely story of grace and forgiveness.
Absolutely.
Right, thank you very much. I will